Welcome again to the Menagiér de Downham Market. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite ingredients, onions. Now, onions, as we are told in the Tatuinum Sanitatis, are warm in the 4th degree and moist in the 3rd. So, what that should tell us, as far as cookery goes, is that onions should be treated in a way which is going to reduce the moistness, if at all possible. And if you're cooking at all, you would be increasing the heat, probably. But there's not really anything you can do about that because it's already hot in the 4th degree. So what you would be expecting as a general treatment for onions would be something in the nature of a fry or a roast, because those are methods of cooking which reduce the moistness to a less dangerous level. And in fact, what we find is in Diversa Cubaria, there's a recipe for abut de Allemand, which is to say a German broth, which contains almond milk, cloves, cubebs, and fried onions. And then you mix it together and make a broth out of it. And that's exactly what one would sort of expect to see happening with onions from a humoral perspective. Now, Terence Scully mentions, however, that in your talking about onions in regional variations of cookery, that in French, Italian, and Hispanic cookery, they are almost inevitably going to be fried, whereas in English cookery, they will be sometimes put in raw into pottages, which means that they're going to be not having their moistness reduced. And in fact, there's a recipe here in Form of Curry, which talks about exactly that, which does exactly that. Blanche porree, which is take white leeks and parboil them, and then hew them small, cut them up with onions, and then seethe it up in broth with birds. So the English, for some reason, are not treating these onions in the same typical way as the continental cuisines would be doing. Now, it's interesting in noting that the first recipe I read is from a slightly earlier set of recipes. So there is kind of a question there. Did those earlier recipes still maintain more of a relationship to the continental recipes, whereas the later recipes have been adapted more to the English taste and climate? Hard to say. It's an interesting question. But in any case, onions show up in a lot of recipes. They're a very common food, and they are treated in a lot of ways. I love onions. We cook a lot of onions. Personally, when I'm doing feasts, unless I've got someone with a very dangerous allium allergy, I'm going to use onions in at least some of the recipes. And whenever you're doing onions, especially if you're doing them for a large feast gathering, you end up cutting a lot of onions, peeling and cutting a lot of onions, which can be annoying, but there are some tricks and some techniques to make the cutting and slicing of onions a little bit more straightforward and a little bit faster. And why don't we go into the kitchen and look at some of those techniques. So, onions. Onions, pretty straightforward, really, but since you use them so much, or I use them so much, it's important to kind of have an idea of ways to cut them. So typically, for almost any purpose, I start by cutting off the ends, and then, unless I need them to be in rings, cut them in half. That makes it very easy to peel off, and then if you've got a bit of bad bit, just cut it off. But you just peel it off that way, which leaves you with this. Then, depending on application, if you want half rings, pretty straightforward, you just go there. Important, keep the fingers out of the way while you're cutting, and you get your half rings. Otherwise, fingers on either side to cut in half, and then you can cut like that. Now, if you want to do the whole onion, it's kind of a pain in the butt, because what you need then, and you can do it with any knife you have, but what you end up having to do is, and it's easier with a smaller knife, is you just kind of have to cut the top layer or two around so that you can peel the skin off, like so. And then once you've got the skin off, then if you want, you can trim off the last little bit. Like that. Now, one of the things that you can kind of do, if what you want to do is mince or otherwise get small bits, and this is kind of a neat trick, is if I've got my onion, works better with bigger onions of course, cut through, but not all the way through, so that it's still attached at the end. Then, again, you cut almost all the way through, but not quite, so that when you cut, you get the little tiny pieces. And then when you get down to the end, you roll it over and go through. So, cut almost through, pieces, slices, and then you get that lovely sort of minced onion. Usually that's what I want, but if I need something smaller, that's the method to do it.